Assalamu alaikum, how are you all? I hope you are good and in the best of your health. Welcome to my YouTube channel, and this is my first video for O levels in IGCSE AddMaths. So the topic that I will be covering in this video is basically quadratic functions, and this video will only cover up the most important introductory subtopics of this chapter. So in this introductory video we are going to study linear versus quadratic equations, what are the different types of quadratic equations, the difference between linear and quadratic graphs. Okay, so our first subtopic is the difference between linear and quadratic equations. So, a linear equation is represented in its standard form like this: y equals to mx plus c. And how do we figure out that whether it's a linear equation or not? The word linear itself means a line. So, this is basically a straight line, and if you see the x, the x has a hidden power of 1, which also indicates that it is a linear equation. And if this variable x has any other power greater than 1, then it would be a curve and not a straight line. Now the other thing is, what are the different variables in this equation? So this y and x, this y and this x, basically what are they? They are the variables that represents points on a coordinate plane. X basically represents the horizontal position, and y represents the vertical position. You know the graph, right? For instance, this is the graph. This is the x-axis and this is the y-axis. So y-axis is basically your vertical position, and x-axis is your horizontal position. So the x represents the x coordinates that are lying over the horizontal position, and or you can say how far they are moving, and the y coordinates represents the vertical position, how far upwards or downwards they are going. Now the other thing is the m is what? M is basically the gradient, or you can also call it a slope. Now what is a gradient or a slope? It basically refers to how the steep the line is, or we can say what is the direction of the line, whether the line is going upwards or whether it's going whether it's tilted towards the x-axis, or we can also calculate it as the change in y, that is basically the rise in the y coordinates, divided by the change in x, that is basically run. Now if it's a positive gradient, we will say that the line increases from left to right. And if the gradient is negative, it means that it is decreasing. And if the gradient is 0, then the line is a horizontal line. Now what is the c over here? C is basically the y-intercept. What does y-intercept means? A line that intersects the y-axis at any point will be your y-intercept. So I hope all of these concepts are clear in your mind. If you have any questions, you can ask me in the comment section and I'm going to assist you. Okay, any line that has a standard form like this, y equals to ax square plus bx plus c. Okay, and over here, as you can see, that this x has a power of 2. Okay, whenever you have a power of 1, then it's a linear equation. Over here it has a power of 2, which indicates that this is a quadratic equation. And obviously if it's a quadratic equation, then it will form a curve. Now, what is the difference between a quadratic equation and a quadratic expression? It's pretty easy. Like we were studying the two things, the difference between a linear expression and a linear equation. For instance, if I have written 2x plus 5, now this is a linear expression, and if it is written in this way, there's an equals to sign and then you have a 0 after it, or it can be any number after this equals to sign. So this indicates that this is a linear equation, and this is just a simple linear expression. So whenever you have an equals to sign, it's going to indicate that it is a equation, and whenever you don't have any equals to sign, we just consider it as a linear expression. So similarly, if you have any thing written like x square minus 5x plus 6 and there is no equals to sign, so this is basically a quadratic expression. Okay, and if I write an equals to sign after it equals to 0, now this becomes a quadratic equation. Now there are many students who are in their final year of IGCSE or final year of O levels, and they are unaware of the difference between expression and an equation. So I hope your concept is clear now, that whenever you have an equals to sign and you are equating it with any number or 0, then it's an equation, and if you have no equals to sign, then it's a simple expression. Now, the second subtopic is the different types of quadratic equations that we'll be studying further. Okay, there are three ways in which a question can represent a quadratic equation. So first was your standard form for the quadratic equation, that was y equals to ax square plus bx plus c. Okay, now the second form is y equals to a x minus h whole square plus k. Now this is called a vertex form or completed square form. Now there are many students who find completed square form very difficult, so don't you worry about that. We will be also studying how to actually get a completed square form out of a quadratic equation. Okay, so we'll be inshallah doing it in our further lessons. Okay, so the h and k in this completed square form represents the turning points of the curve. Okay, so the h is basically your x coordinate Okay, h is basically your x coordinate and k is your y coordinate. Okay, so further we will be studying later on, like how are we supposed to find out the turning points, and this is something new that you might have learned. Okay, now the third form of a quadratic equation is written as y equals to x minus c and x minus k. Now this form is basically called factored form. Okay, now why is it called a factored form? Because if you remember, whenever you factorize an equation, okay, for instance, if your equation was ax square plus bx plus c equals to 0, okay, so you might get two factors, okay, in this form. Okay, and then you equate each and every factor separately with 0, okay, like this, to find out the specific values for x. Okay, so similarly, this is the concept that is taken over here, and this is basically known as the factored form. Okay, now the third subtopic is linear graphs. Okay, so for a linear equation, I am, for instance, sketching a graph. Okay, one more thing. The difference between sketching and drawing or plotting a graph is, sketching is basically you are roughly drawing the graph, okay, and plotting is basically you are, for instance, you are given a certain equation, okay, and then you are assuming the points, the x coordinates, for instance 0 1 and 2, and then you are placing that x coordinates, for instance, if this is your equation, okay, so you are placing the x coordinates in this equation in the place of x, and then you are getting the y coordinates. Like just see, for instance, if you have x that is 0, so when your x is 0, so your y is going to be 3. Okay, so like this, if your x is 1, then your y is going to be 4. If your x is 2, then your y is going to be 5. So now you are basically figuring out different points by putting it in the equation, and then you plot the graph. Okay, so that is basically a proper plotting of the graph. Over here I'm just sketching. Okay, now let's assume that these are my 2 points. Look, okay, for a linear equation, uh, we should have at least 2 points. Okay, okay, so I just joined the 2 points, making it as a linear graph. Okay, so with 2 points x and y, I had drawn a straight line. Okay, there can be many other linear equations as well, such as the ones like, for instance, I'm again drawing a graph. This is your y-axis and this is your x-axis. Now if you have a line, straight line that is crossing the y-axis, okay, so at this point we can say that, for instance, it's crossing the y-axis at 2, so the equation of the line is going to be y equals to 2. Okay, any line that is horizontal, okay, and it is parallel to the x-axis, okay, so this line will always be y equals to any number. Okay, the next is, for instance, again I am drawing a graph. This is y-axis and this is x-axis. Now let's assume that you have any line that is crossing the x-axis, and let's assume that this is 1. So any line that is vertical and that is parallel to your y-axis and it's crossing the x-axis at some point, over here it's 1, so we can say that x equals to 1. So this will be the equation of this straight line. Okay, and the next thing is, for instance, if you have a line, okay, that is, as I've told you earlier, for instance, it's passing like this. Okay, so now you can see that this is going downwards. Okay, if it's moving downwards, then the slope of this line will be negative. Okay, whenever this line is moving downwards. Okay, so the standard equation of such line is going to be y equals to minus mx plus c. Okay, and if I give you another situation in which your line is, for instance, moving upwards. Okay, as you can see that this line is moving upwards, so over here your m will be positive. So the equation of this line is going to be y equals to mx plus c. Okay, so the fourth and last subtopic of this introductory video are the quadratic graphs. Okay, so now for instance, if you have a quadratic graph like this, okay, so this is basically your minimum point, and we can say that this graph is basically an upward graph. Okay, upward. Secondly, we can also say that the value for a is greater than 0. And what is this a? For instance, if you remember, you are given a function of x such as ax square plus bx plus c. So this is basically the a over here, that is the coefficient of x square, and this a should be greater than 0 to make this quadratic graph an upward graph. And as I've told you that this is your minimum point. And secondly, if you have a quadratic graph like this, okay, so this point, the topmost point, is your maximum point of the curve. Okay, and you can see that this is a downwards graph, and the value for a in this case is going to be less than 0. Okay, less than 0 means usually it will move towards the negative values. Okay, and if you see the function, so it's going to be fx is negative ax square plus bx plus c. So over here this negative a means that your value for a will always be less than 0. Okay, so this is the end of this introductory video. I hope you found it very beneficial, and stay tuned to my channel. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and click the bell icon so that you can be notified about the upcoming videos regarding this chapter. Take care. Bye bye.